Hello, humans. It's your host, Corey, and this week we're going to talk about meditation. And I realized that I needed to revisit the basics because of some conversations that I had at this conference that I just did at the end of June. So you may have noticed that I'm a couple days late on this episode, and the reason for that is because I was traveling. I went and did a keynote presentation at a conference in Dallas, Texas, the Texas Council of Community Centers conference. It was a wonderful conference with amazing people. They were very kind to me. I had a really good time. But I also was listening while I was there to kind of their struggles, what they're dealing with, because they are very typical of the kind of groups that I speak to, people that I help. Either they're people who work with families like mine with a lot of difficult situations or circumstances, or they themselves maybe are doing really hard work as service-based helpers, and so they themselves are at risk of burning out or damaging their relationship with themselves. And so this is very typical of the kind of audience that I end up speaking to. Not just everyday folk like you and me, in which we are just trying to survive. We're just trying to get through our lives, but specifically to the kind of work that they do. And I was listening to their grievances, kind of like what they're dealing with. And I realized that we don't always make a clear connection between like what meditation is doing and how that helps us in our work at all. Like it's not clear what that's doing. And so I was like, I really need to speak more about that, about what we're getting wrong about meditation and how we can do it even when we're in very time crunched spaces, because I think a lot of the hesitation that people have against meditation, at least for me, and you guys can tell me in the comments if I'm off base here, but the two things that I hear the most is either they don't have time to meditate or they just don't really know what they're doing when their meditation, like during their meditation. So it's like, am I really just sitting here, and like, why does it matter? And so I wanted to revisit this idea and clarify those points, and then also try to make meditation as accessible as possible to show you that even in something like a time span of 1 minute, you can really help yourself out by applying these principles. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to go back into meditation. It was one of the very first episodes that I did. If you've been following A Well Cared For Human for a long time, I think like one of the first toolkit episodes was what is meditation, how do you do it, why you should do it, etc. So you can of course go back and listen to that if you want to, but this is kind of my updated version, opinion of that, and how I feel it connects to a lot of the things that we're struggling with now. Because I see, at least in myself, probably true for you too, this real struggle to maintain an attention span. And I think the internet has really accelerated this. So for example, when we're on our phones and we're just scrolling, we're creating this high turnover rate in our attention span, and that is the opposite of what meditation does. So meditation stabilizes your attention and it teaches you how to focus and how to be present, but I think a lot of the habits and the way that we live now disrupts that. And so meditation has become more essential than ever, not just for our mental health, because we don't always understand the connection between our mental health and our attention span, but also because we are being subjective to this intensive environment in which we're always being disrupted, we're always being interrupted, and that is really detrimental to our mental health. And so, what is meditation? And how does it fit into your relationship with yourself? How does it fit into your well-being? So meditation is developing a sense of awareness and a sense of presence. So basically you're teaching your mind to be still. So if you have a very racy mind, so my mind, she tends to speed all over the place. She is busy. She's got things to do. She's always got ideas. So she's like hopping around. She's bouncing all over. And it isn't that meditation is going to stop that completely. In fact, one of the core principles of what it teaches you is just to accept that the mind is kind of flighty. She's kind of all over. But what it does teach you to do is to see what your mind is doing, to be present with your mind, to recognize that you're all over the place. And the reason why that awareness is important is not just for your mental health, your ability to see your thoughts and realize, oh, I'm agitated, oh, I need to slow down, like I'm thinking too fast, I need to calm this down, but also to realize that when we are emotionally reactive, so if you're dealing with any strong emotions like anger or depression, anxiety, it starts first in the mind, in the thoughts and the feelings. They get generated, right, by the thoughts. They amplify the feelings that we have. And so if we can recognize that shift in our thoughts and emotions earlier, we're more likely to tamper down the reactivity that gets us into trouble. When we go from 0 to 60, when we were okay 1 minute, then we were triggered and now, we're yelling at someone, or we were triggered and now we're in tears and we're completely upset and the day is ruined. We aren't able to see that if we don't have awareness. It kind of reminds me of when I was struggling with my eating disorder in the way back in my mid-20s, which is that the cycle of, binging and purging, it happened so fast, right? I was triggered by something and then it was like I was done before I even really realized what was happening, why I was doing it, what even triggered me. So it was developing awareness and the ability to focus, to have concentration, or to stop myself. These are all really just the words for the same phenomenon. So when I say awareness, when I say focus, when I say concentration, all of that is generated by meditation, but we're going to get into that in a minute. But essentially, this trigger sequence, whether that's with a strong emotion or an eating disorder or an addiction, we can't interrupt that and stop ourselves from fulfilling the compulsive activity, the compulsive habit, if we don't have awareness that we've been triggered, that we don't have awareness that internal shift has started. And so if you're someone who does struggle with addictive thought patterns, or you have, difficulty settling your mind, or addictions of any kind, eating disorders of any kind, anything that involves triggers, emotional disruption, awareness is your friend. Like, you really need to develop a strong muscle of awareness in order to regain control of your well-being. And so meditation is one way to do that. But one of the graphics that I shared at my presentation was this idea that meditation is just one aspect of mindfulness. So if you imagined a big circle, and in that big circle is mindfulness, and in a little circle inside of that big circle is meditation. So some people think that the only way to develop awareness is through meditation, and that is one great way to do it, but that's not the only way. If you were to take any mindfulness practice, and there are many books about what mindfulness is, how to practice it, it gives you exercises and activities. There's a book that I really like, for example, I'll show it to you. We'll do movie magic and we'll cut here and I'll bring the book up. Hold on. So I'll bring this up closer to the camera so you can see it. But this is a book that I have read many times, Mindfulness, Meditation in Everyday Life, Wherever You Go, There You Are, by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And so it talks about different kinds of mindfulness in the book, like gives you examples, but then it also gives you these little exercises at the end, try, and so you can try these different presence activities, I guess we could call them. But the reason why that's important, the reason why that's helpful, is that this idea that you don't have to just sit down and meditate. Again, it's great if you have a meditation practice and you're able to sit down and devote that time every day to meditation. Wonderful for you. But a lot of us are not. We're already kind of in these cycles. We're in these addictive patterns. We're kind of being dragged through life by our responsibilities. And we can't imagine changing how we do things because we're so boxed in by the circumstances. And so the thing I want to make really clear about meditation and mindfulness, I'm using those two words interchangeably here, is that it's not just about creating a separate thing that you add to your plate. It's also about changing how you do what you do. So for example, if you go through your day and you're always rushing and you're super stressed and your mind is really agitated, training yourself how to go through your day differently with a sense of peace, with a sense of calm, with a sense of trust, just how you do your tasks instead of like rushing through them or being super activated by the moment and kind of like that. That's how I look whenever I'm dealing with something that's stressing me out. Forcing yourself to slow down and be like, this is going to get done. It's not going to take 15 extra seconds for me just to do this properly instead of doing it very agitated. And so training yourself to do what you were already doing differently, that's also part of meditation. So all of this, it's all the same thing, meditation, mindfulness, awareness, It's all the same thing, and what it's meant to teach you is presence. And why is presence important? Because A, it helps us to, again, disrupt these addictive patterns. So anything that you might be doing that you would love to stop doing, anything that might be hurting you that you would love to stop doing, you can't interrupt that cycle. You can't stop that unless you have enough awareness to recognize the trigger pattern. It's so much easier to interrupt an addictive pattern early in the very beginning when the trigger is just starting to build than later once you've already got into it and the feelings are big and the emotions feel catastrophic and you're just wrapped up in the enormous energy of it, right? Later down. Like if you imagined your trigger as like a cycle, like a steps thing. This is not very, very clear on the video, or if you're listening to this on Spotify, even worse. But just imagine like a spectrum, like where you start with something and it's like a tiny little ball, it's a little bitty, and then it starts to roll down the hill. That's your trigger and your reaction cycle. So it starts to roll down the hill, and snowball effect, right? So it's getting bigger and bigger the farther and farther it goes. It's so much harder to stop that rolling ball, that stone, farther down the hill when it's bigger, when it's got a lot more momentum behind it, when it's very easily just going to crush you. It's much easier to try to catch it early in the cycle when it's just this tiny pebble and it hasn't even really started rolling yet. But the key to doing that is awareness. And so you can't recognize that, oh, it's starting to move, like, oh, I should do something, I should cut this off right now, unless we have that awareness. And so that's why there's a really strong connection between our attention span and our well-being. Because if we're not present, if we don't have a good attention span, if we're not very aware of what's going on with us internally, externally, then we have a really hard time interrupting these cycles, catching our reactivity, and keeping everything small. So I would argue that awareness is one of the most important mental health techniques that you can cultivate. I think a lot of people shy away from it though. Like, why aren't we all just living lovely, aware lives? It's because we don't always like what we see. So, for example, when I first started developing awareness, I started to see all of the terrible things that I was doing to myself, right? Which I didn't love. Like, that was very uncomfortable. That made me feel really bad about myself. There was a lot of shame that rushed in when I started to see it. So I survived all of my terrible circumstances with maladaptive coping mechanisms, right? So I was very emotionally reactive, and I was very angry, and I was very, unkind sometimes to other people, or I was very short. I had a short fuse, that kind of thing. So if these are just the examples of things I didn't like about myself in the beginning. So if you're someone who starts to develop awareness, but you don't like what you see, it's really hard to stay motivated to keep going. To be like, well, I don't want to look at this. Like, that's terrible. Why would I want to see these things about myself? But the reality is that you can't change those things you don't like about yourself unless you see them. So I am not as angry as I used to be, right? I'm not as emotionally reactive as I used to be, but I don't have the addictive struggles that I had in the past with like my eating disorder and stuff. I never really struggled with drugs and alcohol, I think, because like how do we even explain that? My experiences with my mother, with my family, they were so terrible that I was kind of hesitant and avoidant. So I guess I didn't need the DARE program growing up as a kid, right? The Stay Off Drugs program that they ran us through. The kids of my generation, they had this program in school called DARE. I don't even remember what it stands for now. I would have to look it up. But this, like, don't do drugs, kids. I didn't even need that because at home, I saw everyone struggling so much that I was like, I already know what's going to happen to you if you do this. I don't need to get into it as well. And so I didn't have that aspect, but there were other addictive problems that I had. So I was addicted to certain thought patterns. Like, I was addicted to certain emotional triggers, to emotional patterns. And so when we think of addictive personalities, it's not always just about drugs and alcohol. Sometimes it's food, or sometimes it's terrible relationships, which are two addictions that I definitely had. There's other ways that kind of stuff shows up. And so when you start practicing awareness, and you see, oh, I have this terrible pattern of dating people who mistreat me. Oh, I have this terrible relationship with food. oh, I do not pick the right friends for me. Like, my friends are not great people. Like, I pick people who mimic the kind of relationships that I had in my early adulthood, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is that we start to see and we don't like, that can make us not want to continue with the development of our awareness. But again, you can't break those things. You can't change them. You can't start bringing wonderful, loving people into your life. You can't build that great relationship with food. You can't fall in love with yourself if you don't start to look at those things. And so I just want to say that I do think absolutely that meditation, awareness of any kind, awareness practices, mindfulness practices of any kind will change your life. But at the same time, when it starts to happen and you don't like what you see at first, don't let that discourage you. Don't let that be an excuse to give up or to run away or say it's not working or that, oh my gosh, this is terrible, this is a mess. Just imagine that everything that's happened to you in the past and all of the autopilot stuff that you've developed as a result of all of those experiences, that it was just a trashed room that you closed the door on. Understandably, right? Who would want to look at that? Who would want to look at all the terrible things that other people have done to us, or all the poor experiences that we've had, or all the suffering, or all the pain? Of course, we shut that door on that, right? But awareness is you're opening the door and you're looking at this trashed room, this absolute mess of a room, and it doesn't look great, and you don't love it, and you're not really sure where to begin, but just pick one thing to clean up. Just one thing to work on. Like, I'm just going to work on not being so angry. I'm just going to work on not having this relationship with food, having a healthier relationship with food. I'm just going to work on slowing down in my day and not rushing through everything and stressing myself out. I'm just going to work on saying no more and having better boundaries and not letting everyone take advantage of my time and my generosity. Whatever that is, that one thing, just take one thing at a time. And you will find that with enough patience, that entire room will get cleaned up. And that the messes that come through that room, because we will all have them forever, like we will all have things that come up, new experiences. For example, when my mother was murdered, wasn't something I planned to process, right? A tornado came through my room again. But I just took one thing at a time and cleaned it up again, and now it's fine. And so just treat it that way, as we got to do a deep clean at first. We got to get everything organized and in its place. And yes, every once in a while, the room will get dirty again in the future, but it's not going to be a big deal, because by then we will have the skills in place that will know what to do with this mess when it shows up. And so that's kind of my soapbox on, we absolutely need meditation in our lives. We need it because all transformation, all what even we call that, self-healing, I think transformation probably really is the best word I have for it, but anything you want to change about yourself, of your life, it begins with you being able to see it. And you can't see it unless you develop the skills for seeing it, and that's awareness. And how do we develop awareness? Through mindfulness practices like meditation. And so we have reached the end of this week's episode. I want to thank you so much for listening, and I will be back with another episode of A Well Cared For Human. And until then, please take good care of you.